Vision Radio Show with your host, Lonnie Clark. Our dedication to living life joyfully allows us to confront the reality of unmitigated deception and political denial of the harm caused by nuclear and chemical contamination. We demand an end to corporate control of science and suppression of facts for political and financial gain. We are not assets on a balance sheet. We must honestly work together to remediate damage to benefit our planet and humanity. Remember, happiness is resistance, and love is greater than fear. Join the Age of Fission radio show on Spreaker.com. Search for Lonnie Clark for all our podcasted shows. Podcasts are also on YouTube at nutzforart. nutzforart. Thank you for being part of the solution. Good evening. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show, and I want to thank everybody for joining us. I am doing a live show at 7:30 in the evening on November 7th, 2019 here on Spreaker.com. My podcasts do get aired on a lot of venues, actually. YouTube goes up on iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spotify. So you can look for the Age of Fission radio show there. And you can also follow us at 11 o'clock at night on kepw.org, www.kepw.org. Or if you're in the Eugene, Springfield, Oregon area, you can tune in at 11 p.m. at 97.3 FM LP here in the Eugene, Springfield surrounding areas. So tonight I'm actually going to be sharing with you something that I've been reading on my YouTube channel. And it is called The Citizens Radiation Data Map of Japan Digest Edition. And it is basically some citizens group, the Mina No Data Site. It's the collective database of citizens' radioactivity measuring labs. A group of citizens in Japan decided to start measuring the radioactivity throughout Japan so that they could actually understand what they were living with. Because since the Japanese government has basically turned a blind eye to the radioactivity, and now on top of that, this is why I keep talking about it, we're about to have the 2020 Olympics there. It is incredibly dangerous to send our youngest, brightest, smartest, healthiest athletes into radioactivity. And for anybody that plans on going, please think again, because it is not safe. So this book is actually, you can get it at, I will post the link, but you can get it, let me see if I can find the back of it. It's called Mina No Data Site Publishing. It's MINNA-NO Data Site Publishing. And you can contact them at minods@gmail. That's MINNANODS @gmail.com. And the website is https://MINNANODS.net. So I bet if you just typed in minanods.net, MINNANODS, there is a lot of stuff in here. They basically wrote a book in Japanese, and this is the digest edition in English. And I was given permission to read this by Tony Sahara, who is involved in this. He designed it with Naoko Araki, Naoko Araki, and forgive my messing up of your name, ma'am, but I don't speak Japanese and haven't really ever heard it, so except on television a few times. But I wanted to read this because I'm reading this on my YouTube channel, Nuts for Art, and I read my second part tonight, and the information that I read, I was actually going to report, my usual on the Age of Fission. What I do is I dig around on the internet and look for stories that nobody's talking about radioactive contamination. And believe you me, there's a lot to talk about. But this blew my mind tonight, and it changed up all of my plans in the last hour. Just how the Japanese government did not do any testing. All of the testing that came out of the Japanese government basically is an estimation. So what they did, this is really incomprehensibly irresponsible. They took a helicopter and went up 150 to 300 meters above ground, and then they looked directly below the helicopter at an area of 300 to 600 meters in diameter. And so a meter is 100 centimeters, so it's actually 1.9 yards for those of us in America. So they took, this was approximately 300 to 600, maybe 700 yards when you multiply the old 9 by 600, right? So 300 to 600 yards, maybe a little bit bigger than that. In diameter, they measured the radiation from 300 meters above the ground, looked at a 300 to 600 meter diameter on the soil, and then they put the radiation levels that they had from 300 meters above ground, put that into an aerial survey data software, and said that's how much radiation there was in the area. Meaning they never tested the dirt. They never tested the area. There's no distinction between the contamination below 10,000 becquerels per square meter. So they just never tested it. So I'm just going to read you this one little section of it. And for those of my listeners who follow me on YouTube, this is going to be a bit of a repeat, but I don't think that that's actually a bad thing, because we need to keep hearing this stuff. How did the Japanese government measure radiation after the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant accident? To start, the Japanese Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology, the English acronym is MEXT, and the Japanese Nuclear Regulatory Authority conducted aerial measurements at an altitude of approximately 300 meters above sea level and calculated the air dose rates in sieverts. Then they averaged the air dose at 1 meter above the ground in a diameter of 300 to 600 meters. Finally, they estimated the deposition amount of radioactive cesium in becquerels on the surface of the ground, and used these estimated figures to publish their soil contamination map. On top of the fact that these were estimated values based on supposition, on the government-published contamination map, there is no distinction for contamination below 10,000 becquerels per square meter. Therefore, any value less than this amount, 10,000 becquerels per square meter, there is no raw data we can use to confirm detailed contamination. It was for this reason that the data site felt the need to launch a project to directly collect and measure the soil using becquerels. So their method, this group, the Mina no Data Site's soil measuring method, they went out and collected dirt, actually. They went 20 centimeters by 10 centimeters, 20 centimeters deep, 10 centimeters wide, 5 centimeters down. So front to back, it was 20 centimeters. Left to right, it was 10 centimeters. 5 centimeters down in the dirt. That collected 1 liter or 1.6 quart. That was their soil sampling. And then they sifted it, and then they packaged it up and shipped it to their analyzing site. so that they actually tested the dirt, right? And the map that you will see, and I know this is a visual podcast, but it is kind of shocking. They tested 17 prefectures for 3 years. They did a 3-year study after 2011. And they tested all of eastern Japan. They tested the Aomori, the Iwate, Miyagi, Fukushima, Ibaraki, Saitama, Chiba, Tokyo, Kanagawa, Yamanashi, Shizuoka, Nagano, Gunma, Togochi, Niigata, Yamagata, Akita. Those are the 17 prefectures in Japan, and they left out really only 3. They left out the Osaka, the Fukuoka, and the Hokkaido. And I apologize to anybody who actually speaks Japanese, and I don't mean to offend you. The becquerels that they tested, and they tested for cesium-137. Let me go into a quick explanation for that. It is kind of a shock to realize that the Japanese government, they actually didn't test. They didn't test the soil. They just took a guess at it, and they didn't measure anything. I mean, it's beyond comprehension to realize that we are 9 years in on 3/11/2020. We're going to be 9 years in, and the Japanese government never tested accurately. Wow, it is really beyond comprehension that they actually never really tested. Wow. I'm trying to figure out where to show you how I can describe this. If you look at a map of Japan, what they did was they have levels of radiation that they're measuring, and they are showing the sites. I'm going to see if I can describe it because it is incomprehensibly contaminated. Well, actually, they have actually, in the very last page of this, they have their measuring rooms. Sorry about this, you guys, but there is definitely, I just lost the page. You're just going to have to grin and bear it because I'm doing a live feed tonight. Here it is, the radioactivity. So they measured up to levels around the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant in becquerels per kilogram. 200,000 becquerels per kilogram directly around the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. And it spreads out west. It goes down to 150,000, 100 becquerels, within probably the vicinity of 50 miles. Further south, around Tokyo, it looks like the Tokyo area has approximately, in some areas of Tokyo, it has 400 becquerels per kilogram, 200 becquerels per kilogram, 100 becquerels per kilogram, and 50 becquerels per kilogram. But most of it is colored to be where Tokyo is. It looks like, to me, if I'm reading the map correctly, it looks anywhere from 800. Some of the areas are 3,700 becquerels, and it goes down to 200 becquerels per kilogram. A few spots are 100 becquerels per kilogram. And in the Ibaraki and a large part of the Fukushima and the Tochigi and the Gunma, the areas, it looks like they are at about 11,000 to pretty much 400 becquerels per kilogram. All in the Fukushima Daiichi, in the Fukushima and the Miyagi and the Iwate, the areas. These are areas where they're going to have the Olympics, guys. It goes up to 100,000 becquerels per kilogram. Now, cesium, this is what they measured for, cesium-137. They specifically tested for cesium-137 because cesium-134, which we know came out of them, you can test for cesium-134 and 137. But cesium-134 expires, its half-life goes away in about 2 years. So after 2 years, what's left is cesium-137, which has a half-life of 27.5 years, and they rounded it up to say 30 years, right? So basically, they were testing because prior to that, if you only tested for cesium-134, I think I'm backwards on this one. Let me read it. They tested for cesium-134 because even when I read it this afternoon, it took me a few minutes to really get this one. Okay, I'm just going to read it right from them, and then you guys can understand it. A high priority for this project was to measure the amount of cesium-134, which has a half-life of 2 years. So I got it backwards. They tested for cesium-134. By only measuring cesium-137, which has a half-life of 30 years, it would have been very difficult to differentiate between radioactivity from previous nuclear weapons tests and radioactivity derived from the Fukushima accident. With those time constraints, and by sampling a large area and conducting measurements, it was possible to do a becquerel attenuation correction calculation for every measuring spot, which made it possible to carry out a comparison of each spot and thus draw an even more accurate contamination map. The reason we thought it was necessary to conduct soil measurements over a wide area and for a period of 3 years is that we wanted to determine the real state of radioactive contamination caused by the Fukushima accident and leave a record of radiation diffusion for future generations. The fact that we have been able to publish a map with the estimated cesium contamination 100 years from now, while the Japanese government has not been able to do so, is one of the biggest achievements of our becquerel measurement projects. Essentially, what this booklet is telling us is literally telling us that the Japanese government literally still to this day has not tested for radioactivity in Japan. While Shinzo Abe stood in front of the world stage and said, "Don't worry, everything's fine. We've got it all under control. It's all fine." And now they are forcing people back into contaminated zones. And frankly, when you look at this map, and I genuinely hope everybody will look at this, go to the Googles and look at this map. Just type in radioactivity map of 17 prefectures in eastern Japan, or go to the iNods. Let me read that website again. Minanods, MINNANODS.net. Minanods, MINNANODS.net. Minanods.net, all one word. MINNANODS.net. Take a look at it. It will shock the socks off of you, which it's done to me. I mean, I would say at least a third of Japan is highly radioactive. I mean, this is what they're going to do, folks. They're starting the Olympics in the Fukushima prefecture. They're going to have a runner running the Olympic torch from Fukushima prefecture down to Tokyo. When I look at this map, the levels of contamination, the color coding, it looks like it is no less from Fukushima prefecture down to Tokyo. The average radioactive contamination is 11,000 becquerels per kilogram for a large part of it. And then for some parts of it, it goes down to 200. Some parts it goes down to 400. Some parts it goes down to 800. But for a long way, it is anywhere from 11,000, if not 30,000, to 3,700 for a long way. And then it goes down to 800 and 400. But in big parts, it looks to me as if in big parts of Tokyo Prefecture, huge amounts of radioactivity down there. It looks like it's 11,000 to 3,700 becquerels per kilogram of cesium-137. It's beyond comprehension. There is a page that talks about the Tokyo Olympics. I have not read it, so I'm just going to read this, and we'll be sharing this for the first time myself. This map was prepared using data from soil samples collected during the Eastern Japan Soil Becquerel Measurement Project over a 3-year period from October 14th to September 17th. Based on actual measurement values of cesium-137 becquerels per kilogram on the sampling day and using March 15, 2011 as a starting point, we did an attenuation calculation to figure out the theoretical value on July 1, 2020. That's what this map is. Then using the data site's original color-coded scale, we displayed the results of this calculation on the map. It should be noted that this map shows attenuation based on calculation, and therefore there is no guarantee that these values will be met. Furthermore, the value of each sampling location is not indicative of the typical contamination level for the entire area. Wow. So essentially what they're showing us on this map is pretty much the same thing, except there's a larger space in between the Fukushima Daiichi map and the Tokyo area where the radiation level is only about 400 to 100 becquerels per kilogram. All of it is contaminated. The entire Fukushima prefecture, all of the prefectures around Fukushima and right below Fukushima look like they're highly contaminated with at least 11,000 to 3,700 becquerels per kilogram. And it looks like the Tokyo area on the map is highly contaminated, and it's dotted across western Japan as well. The only places with very low levels of radioactivity are the northwestern part of Japan and the western coast of Japan. But the whole entire eastern coast looks like it's highly contaminated, at a minimum with 50,000 becquerels per kilogram. And remember, before the Fukushima Daiichi accident, if anything was under 20 kilograms or over 20 kilograms, you were considered living in too highly contaminated and you were expected to evacuate. So they have a little thing that I'm going to read here. It says the 2020 Tokyo Olympic Games, July 24th through August 9th, and the Paralympics, August 25th through September 6th. I hadn't even thought of that. They're going to bring people who have disabilities into this area. This is such a crime against humanity. It is unconscionable. I mean, I don't know how we can stop these Olympics, but if anybody knows how we can organize and create a voice, I mean, I don't know where we start. I haven't even got a clue. If you have any ideas, send me an email at nutzforart@gmail, nutzforart@gmail. So I'm going to read what it says in this little box. The Olympic Games will take place at venues over a wide area of Japan, from Sapporo on the northern island of Hokkaido, which is not contaminated, to the foothills of Mount Fuji to the west of Tokyo, which is contaminated. There is particular cause for concern about nearby soil contamination at a soccer venue in Miyagi, at baseball and softball venues in Fukushima, and at the torch relay, which will commence from the J Village Stadium, which is located in the vicinity of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant and was used as an accident response base at the time of the accident. Wow. The Paralympic Games will be held at 21 venues in Tokyo. This is unconscionable. I honestly do not know how our elected officials live with themselves and allow this to continue. I mean, the level of denial, I hope they at least have nightmares at night. So the East Soil Japan Becquerel Measurement Project. So what does it say? East Japan Soil Becquerel Project. Basically, there are maps inside of this little thing that shows how the contamination basically spreads from 2011 to 2111. And by 100 years from now, around the Fukushima nuclear power plant, we are still going to have at least 3,700 becquerels per kilogram of cesium-137. Almost all of Japan will be contaminated with at least 50 to 100 becquerels of radioactivity. And you know what? This is the thing to consider. This map and these projections were not even made with any consideration for like the typhoon that just hit Japan, which spread the radioactive waste all over the place. It's kind of like this thing of how do we deal with it, because we can't even fathom it. You don't feel it, you don't taste it, you don't see it, you can't touch it. What happens is when you are affected with radioactive contamination, you lose your energy, you become diabetic, you bleed from your nose, you bleed from your eyes, you bleed from your ears, your teeth fall out. You lose weight, you become sterile, you can't maintain pregnancies, but you're still alive, right? And so there's a level of plausible deniability in all of this. I don't know how we get the masses to wake up. This radio show is podcasting live out into the God knows where and who's listening. And it's unconscionable. It's unconscionable. I mean, I am just shaking my head when I read this information. Because, yeah, it was 9 years ago, but it's as if it was yesterday. It's not better, folks. It is not a better deal. They are still having to pour water on top of these nuclear power plants that are in constant China syndrome. If they stopped pouring water on them 24 hours a day, they would blow up into a big fire. That's essentially what would happen. They're literally kicking the can down the road. Meanwhile, back at the ranch here in the United States government is doing its best to poison us as well. So I could share with you some of that information, which is really kind of a shock. This is interesting. The South Koreans are actually balking about the 2020 Olympics, to be honest. There's something called Radiation Gate. Yeah, because people are saying that we're being all freaked out about the radiation levels in Japan when there actually has been no testing. There has been no testing by the Japanese government. They have done estimated amounts. That, to me, when I read that, I was completely shocked. I'm just nonplussed by it, folks. If anybody has any ideas on this one, please, I would love to join forces with people on this one. So I am going to talk to you about what is going on here in the United States. And this comes from the decommissioning working group at Rancho Seco, which closed down 30 years ago in Sacramento after the Sacramento people decided to shut down the Rancho Seco nuclear power plant. And like all nuclear facilities, they have no idea what to do with the storage waste. So this thing was shut down 30 years ago. Just like here in Oregon, we shut down the nuclear facility up in Trojan, right? It's called the Trojan Nuclear Power Facility. And basically, this is what, I mean, I am not joking. They literally just covered it up with dirt and turned it into a park. That is what the government's options, that's what they do. Like at Hanford, up at Hanford now, they call it the Hanford, it's called a national park. Hanford has become a national park, and they give tours. I mean, it's just as if it's kind of like the government has rubber stamped or is endorsing radioactively contaminating every man, woman, and child on the planet. And the entire nuclear industry has everybody hoodwinked about it. So this was an email that I got from Donna Gilmore. And Donna Gilmore runs the San Onofre Nuclear, it's called sanonofresafety.org. And she is the woman who discovered that we are storing our nuclear waste in storage tanks that are a half an inch thick, 5/8 inch thick, and they leak at 20 years. So what did the nuclear industry do in the last few weeks? Well, most of the tanks, most of these casks, they call them casks, CASKS, casks. They're all 16, 17, most of them are 16 years old, 17 years old, have been filled for 15, 16 years. So they're coming on the 20-year mark. So the licensees of these nuclear facilities asked the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to extend the license of the tanks. So the Nuclear Regulatory Commission never turned down a request from the nuclear industry, said, sure, we'll license these tanks for 40 years instead of 20 so that you don't have to replace them. And guess what? On the really old ones where the nuclear facilities are shut down, you don't have to measure radioactivity at those sites anymore. You just don't worry about it. The risk is very low because the plant is not in use, so don't worry about it. So this comes as an email, and this is a quote that says, "We would like to have a way to get rid of it," unquote, said Representative Doris Matsui, who's a Democrat from Sacramento. She represents this district. The Congresswoman is working to find a new home, not just for Rancho Seco's spent fuel, but dozens of other nuclear facilities throughout the nation. Since negotiations for a permanent storage at Nevada's Yucca Mountain have been stalled for years, Matsui has a bill to find another housing option, even if it's temporary. Otherwise, if we keep waiting, if it just stays here, and you never know what might happen to it, said Matsui. Tallman is following her bill and says Congress needs to act. I do not know who Tallman is. Matsui said she is confident her bill will pass the House and she's hopeful it will pass the Senate. While the spent fuel may eventually be carted away, those cooling towers will remain standing. One reason not to tear them down is that they house communications equipment. But then there's another big factor. It would be very expensive, said Tallman. These will be monuments for civilizations for decades to come without being a safety concern, I do believe. These people are such liars. I would venture to say Tallman worked for the one of the municipal districts. So I'm going to read this story for you. Oh, Dan Tallman. Yeah, was his, Dan Tallman. He does work for the Sacramento Municipalities Utilities District. So there you go. It's been 30 years since the residents in the Sacramento area made history by closing the Rancho Seco, becoming the first community to shut down a nuclear power plant by public vote. Even if you've never heard of the plant, you may have seen its twin cooling towers. At 425 feet, they're the tallest buildings in the Central Valley, just edging out Sacramento's Wells Fargo Tower. In the 1960s, the Sacramento Sacramento Municipal Utilities District, or SMUD, purchased 2,100 acres about an hour southeast of Sacramento to build Rancho Seco. At the time, nuclear energy was considered the power source of the future. By 1974, Rancho Seco was up and running, but problems plagued it from the beginning, including delays, cost overruns, and outages. Sound familiar, folks? Honestly, that's exactly what the nuclear industry does. They have delays, cost overruns, and outages, and you know who pays for it? Me and you. So back to this article. By 1989, as expenses rose and the public's trust in nuclear energy dropped, voters in the district took the plant's future into their own hands. The voters have spoken, said SMUD's head of its nuclear program at the time, Joe Furlett. We will honor the decision of the voters and we will conduct ourselves in a very professional manner. Rancho Seco was shut down the very next day, June 7th, 1989. To see it now, it is a ghost town, said Dan Talman, who manages everything left over from the old nuclear power days of SMUD. It was not a very happy time in SMUD's history. But the utility has reinvented the place. Rancho Seco is now home to a natural gas plant, a solar field, and construction is getting underway to create an array, a second array, the largest solar project in the county. Oh, this is bizarre. They have a picture of these two nuclear power facilities surrounded by solar panels. Just all of the whole area surrounded by solar panels. About 20% of the land is set aside as a landscape park and campground. I'm telling you, this is what they do. They just say, bring the kids in, let's just poison the children. It surrounds a lake stocked with fish that was served as a water source for the power plant. Yeah, let's just go eat the fish, the radioactive contaminated fish, and then we'll wonder why cancer's increased among children. Cole Vang is from Sacramento and says he likes to fish at the lake regularly. This lake has been producing a lot of good quality fish, and it's a lot of fun, just catch and release. Vang says he doesn't worry about the park being adjacent to a former nuclear power plant. But some in the community do, and they could point to an area just on the other side of those cooling towers where radioactive fuel is still housed. With a tour on Cap Radio in September, Tallman brought us within 100 yards of that dry storage. Even that close, the levels of radiation exposure did not noticeably change, according to an expert we brought along. Do you think I would believe that? Matt Block, a Sacramento state physicist and professor, meaning nuclear liar, said his Geiger counter detects radioactive particles in counts per minute. Even just by standing around your home or at work, there is probably 50 to 60 counts per minute, which is a lie. You know how much we get here in Eugene? I had my radioactive, my Geiger counter here in Eugene says, and I live off of River Road for those of you that know Eugene. My Geiger counter has rarely gone up to 24. Most of the time, whenever I've tested outside, it's 11 to 17. 17 is on the high side. But it usually hangs around 10 to 11 counts per minute. So for these people to say that 50 to 60 counts per minute is normal is a doggone lie. It is a complete lie. And in fact, 50 to 60 counts per minute before Fukushima would be considered, well, not in America, but for most of the world, it was considered too contaminated to live in. These people make me sick. Oh, gosh. SMUD has its own radiation detection tools and confirms that the grounds are safe, but the utility is anxious to move the stored fuel off its land, and they're not the only ones trying to remove it. We would like to have a way to get rid of it, said Rep. Matsui. The congressman is working to find a new home for not just Rancho Seco spent fuel, but dozens of other nuclear facilities throughout the nation. meaning every single one of them, because they have no storage site for the nuclear fuel. It's not even waste. It's a byproduct. These spent nuclear fuel tanks of contaminated muck. It's not waste, because waste you can throw away. Since negotiation is permanent storage for Nevada's Yucca Mountains have stalled for years, Matsui has a bill to find another housing option, even if it's temporary. Otherwise, we'll have to keep waiting. Taliban is following her bill and says Congress needs to act. Someday, we hope the Department of Energy will roll one of their trains up there and can start loading their fuel onto trains to take to the disposal site, and SMUD can get out of the nuclear storage business. Yeah, well, you guys sure should have thought about that before you started your nuclear stupid power plants. Matsui said she's confident her bill will pass the House, and she's hopeful about its chances in the Senate. It is not going to pass the Senate. Sorry. They're not doing jack about this nuclear waste. You know why? Because they know they cannot move it. It's stored in tanks that are cracking. They cannot move the tanks. While the spent fuel may eventually be carted away, those cooling towers will remain standing. One reason not to tear them down is that they house communications equipment. But there's another factor. It would be very expensive. These will be monuments to civilization for decades to come without being a safety concern, I do believe. This is what I call a nuclear liar. Dan Tallman from SMUD. What a perfect name, SMUD. That just makes me spit nails, you guys. I get super excited when I read stories like this. This is just... The reason they're not tearing it down is because it's expensive. They could move the communication equipment. They are not tearing it down because it's going to cost the utility money. These utility companies are literally raping the planet. It's unconscionable what they are doing. It's beyond unconscionable. How long will it take us to decide that we're going to be angry enough to get out and start speaking out about this? I know I am calling Pete DeFazio, and I am calling Ron Wyden's office, and I am calling Jeff Merkley's office, and I call Kate Brown's office, and I actually called Senator Patty Murray and Maria Cantwell up in Washington. Because it's beyond comprehension that our elected officials are literally, leaving Matsui. She's like, oh, well, ho-hum, we have time. We don't have time. We're beyond time. We can't just continue to let these things sit there and fester. Imagine what's going to happen when the big one happens all along the West Coast with all of these nuclear power facilities. It's beyond comprehension, you guys. I honestly, I'm spitting nails on all of it. I cannot even begin to comprehend the lack of humanity that these people are, Oh my gosh. So this is what happens when you start paying attention, is you're like exacerbated, because our elected officials are literally being bought out or coerced, because if they start to say anything, they're going to be drummed out of business. So Donna Gilmore also is talking about these currently dry storage tanks that they use. The dry storage system says there's a myth being propagated by Edison and PG&E, the ones that are shutting down the electricity, which, by the way, what's interesting is they're saying that they're down in Venezuela and South America, that they're all suffering from a socialist government because there's a lot of shortages. Well, what about in the United States? What is unfettered capitalism doing to our nation right now? It's raging fires all up and down California. Hundreds of thousands of people affected. Millions of people. Hundreds of thousands affected, like loss of property, Thank God, not much loss of life, but loss of life from unfettered capitalism. There is a myth being propagated by Edison and PG&E that there are no thick wall casts approved for use in the U.S. That is false. This comes from Donna Gilmore. This is the NRC webpage used for currently used dry storage systems for general use. The Castor V21 and the TN series TN13, 32, and TN68 thick wall casts are all in use, except for the Castor have a current general license, meaning we could store our waste in thick canisters. Right now, our casts are 5/8 inches thick. Excuse me. If a facility wants to use a different container for dry storage, it requires a new license and a license amendment. The license process takes a maximum of 18 months per NRC Division of Spent Fuel Management. Edison and PG&E's claims that it takes years longer is not true. Donna has an email from the NRC confirming a shorter time frame. If a vendor doesn't submit complete information, the process can take longer. At any rate, the fuel isn't going anywhere for decades, probably longer. Therefore, it must be stored in maintainable casks designed for both storage and transport. Both Edison and PG&E have had license amendments in order to use the canisters they are currently using. This is one more red herring Edison, PG&E, and others use to oppose thick wall casks, mainly because they know thick wall casks are maintainable and don't crack, so they don't have technical reasons to oppose them. The following list of DOE inventory lists, the following is a list of U.S. thin wall canisters and thick wall casks as of June 13. Wow, the DOE has not updated this list since June of 2013. Okay, so I am going to open up this link and I'm going to share with you some information. You can find this information at santanofresafety.org. And it is under, you just look on her page for nuclear fuel canisters or nuclear fuel casks, CASCS. So let us see what we have up here in our little neck of the woods. And I am certain I have talked about this. So Trojan, the Trojan where we think that Trojan is closed down. Trojan Nuclear Power Plant, actually, as of 2018, their casks are 15 years old. There are a total of 29 at one of Trojan has two sites. There are 29 total casks. They were first loaded in 2003. The maker was Holtec. And inside each cask is a fuel assembly of spent nuclear fuel rods. There are 24 of them. And in the other Trojan site, there are also it's also 15 years, and these are not bolted, they are welded shut, which means that they could pop open. There are 5 total casks at the other site. They were also loaded in 2003, also a Holtec cask, which means it's 5/8 inches thick and cracks. It literally will crack when it is 20 years old per Holtec. And there are also 24 assemblies per cask. Wow, that's our neck of the woods here in the Northwest, folks. You think that we can just ignore it? I think not. At the Columbia Generating Station in Washington, that's our neck of the woods. That's the nuclear power plant sitting on the Hanford Reservation site, only 11 miles away from Hanford, mind you. As of 2018, it was 16 years old. So now we're in 2019, it is 17 years old. And the total number of casks there are 27. and they were loaded first in 2002. The last time something was loaded in there was in 2008. And this is from also Holtec. So listen to this. Oh my God, we're so super screwed. There are 68 assemblies in each cask. That's the number of fuel assemblies per canister or cask. In each one of those 27 casks, there are 68. And it's 16 years old, and we know they leak at 20 years. Holtec, literally, the manufacturer literally has told us that they start leaking. I don't know if you guys see a pattern here, but there is just a complete pattern of denial and lies. And we're considered tinfoil hatters if we talk about it. They called it what? Radiation gate? I mean, that's supposed to imply that it's a fake investigation. It's incomprehensible, the level of denial. And I don't know how anybody can actually just ignore it. So I'm going to encourage all of you, again, to go to minanods.net. I think I got the name right. MINNANODS.net. And please, take a look at the Citizens Radiation Map of Japan. It is the only verifiable radiation map of Japan that exists because the Japanese government never took samples of the dirt. They never actually measured it correctly. They went up into a helicopter 300 meters above the ground, looked at a diameter of 300 to 600 meters, and said, okay, this area will have about this much levels of cesium-134. It's incomprehensible. They're measuring 134 because it only lasts for 2 years. The 137 lasts for 30 years, which means it could have come from Chernobyl, could have come from 3 Mile Island, it could have come from nuclear testing that we never told about. Oh, Lordy, Lord. You see, guys, this is why it's really not at all hard for me to do this show every week. Because we're just like ducks. We're just like sitting ducks, and they're just boom, 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 knocking us off. And we're just like, yeah, let's just go to the Olympics. We're going to have fun in Japan. We want to eat the fish. We love the Japanese. They're so beautiful. And yes, that is all very, very, very true. They are really a beautiful culture. And they really do deserve our respect and love. And honestly, they are courageous because they are having to live in one of the most contaminated nuclear sites on the planet. In the Ukraine, in Belarus, where Chernobyl happened, they cleared out an area of 50 to 150 miles, depending on where you were. Huge areas over there where people are not allowed to live, still to this day. And yes, people are going back in there. Old people have never really left. But they are not living there easily without illnesses and without sicknesses. And their children are sterile. They have miscarriages. So it's a big fat lie to say we are safe. And for that cat at Rancho Seco, at SMUD, to say that we can leave those nuclear power towers up as a testament to our civilization, they should be ashamed of themselves. They should be apologizing to humanity for disregarding scientists and scientific study. John Goffman, Arthur Tamplin, Linus Pauling begged the governments of the world not to produce nuclear power. And instead of being revered and honored, they were pretty much laughed out of the industry. And now in our universities, they are lying to our students, telling them that radioactivity doesn't really hurt you. And every one of the scientific studies are basically fundamentally based on lies. And that is a fact. We know for a fact that the Hiroshima bombing studies that they did, they destroyed all the tests, all the studies for the children and women. And in fact, they skewed the whole entire study, because when they did a blind study with people who weren't exposed to the radioactivity and the people who were bombed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they compared the two, of course the people from Nagasaki and Hiroshima showed tremendous illnesses compared to the non-exposed group. So what they did, they got rid of the non-exposed group. And then they started exposing people. They started comparing people where, different rates of how close they were to the center of the bombing, which is not even a test. As this booklet has told us, at the Citizens Radiation Data Map of Japan Digest Edition, the Japanese government has never tested the radioactive contamination on the ground. To me, this is a crime against humanity. I'm going to end here. I hope I've rabble-roused you guys enough to keep you engaged and wanting to get engaged. Please contact me at nutzforart@gmail.com. If you're listening to this, send me some feedback. If you want to get together, we can figure out how to organize. I really think we ought to do what we can to stop the 2020 Olympics. It's beyond comprehension. So thank everybody for joining us. My heart goes out to you, and I believe that we will find a way out of this darkness, but only if we face the light and face the facts and face the truth. Put your courage feet on, and remember, happiness is resistance. We'll talk to you guys next Thursday. Ciao. Thank you for joining the Age of Fission radio show. Please like, subscribe, and share on Spreaker.com or on the YouTube channel Nutzforart, NUTZFORART. Send all comments and ideas to Lonnie Clark at ageoffission@gmail.com. We urge all, especially scientists and politicians, to follow the words of our beloved American icon, Mark Twain. Always do right. This will gratify some and astonish the rest. Yes, I want to add a little addendum to that, you guys. I realize I gave you the ageoffission@gmail.com in my outro, but I am actually using my personal email, nutzforart@gmail, if you want to get in touch with me. Put your courage feet on. We'll talk to you soon.